Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Rising Beyond podcast. I am so excited today because I have Dr. Christine Cocchiola and Amy Polacko on to talk with us about the state of our family court systems and their new book, Framed. And so we're going to just really jump into what is the world of post-separation abuse and coercive control and the family court system and the larger systems and what can we do about it? What are people experiencing? So welcome, ladies. I'm so grateful to have you here.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks, Sybil. We appreciate it.
Yeah, so before we get started, just to get everyone straight, maybe I have new listeners today that are just finding us. Can you share just a little Cliff's Notes version of who you are and why we are talking about this? Like, why is this what we're talking about and why is it so important?
Sure, Sybil. Amy is an amazing divorce coach who's advocating all the time for victims and survivors in her work as a journalist also. And as you know, I'm a coercive control expert. I've been researching coercive control for years, and I've been doing this work since the age of 19. And we just really felt like women's voices, mothers' voices needed to be heard. And every single mother in our book, the bravest woman you will ever meet, who we say their stories can be a million times over because it's every woman's story, and we really wanted their voices to be heard, and we are hoping to elevate this conversation significantly about what coercive control looks like. And these, a lot of people call these people narcissistic abusers, so we use those words interchangeably in our book because that actually helps people identify what they're experiencing more readily. It's a more common term, but also this idea of how there's institutional betrayal all of the time, in particular against women.
Yeah. Yes. Second all of that. And Amy, tell us a little bit more about your passion for this.
Well, I think both Dr. Cocchiola and I have clients every day who we are trying to help, who are going through this system, who are surviving abuse. And, it hurts our hearts. And I think we've also felt we want the world to know these stories. So as a divorce coach, I'm dealing with women who are just contemplating divorce. Some are in the thick of it. Some are experiencing post-separation abuse. I feel really passionately that every woman needs to read this book, which is something Tina Swithin of One Mom's Battle wrote. We have on the back of our book, because every woman needs to be educated. So many of us, I was a babe in the woods when I entered into family court, and we just have not been preparing women for what they're going to encounter. And so we feel that women who are dating should be reading this book, women who are, maybe you're happily married, or you're considering a divorce or in the process, or maybe you're post-divorce and you've gone through family court. And I think we have a strong message, which is you're not alone. You're not crazy. There are millions out there just like you.
Yeah. And I actually appreciate that. I was like, what are we going to talk about today on the podcast? And it's interesting because as I initially pose questions, usually it's like, why do you want survivors to X, Y, and Z? And so I was thinking maybe this book is actually not just specifically for survivors. And so I'm so glad you said that, because I had that thought of I'm actually thinking this could be for more than just that. And so when you guys were starting to, kind of decide on this book, was that the initial intention of we want to support the every woman?
I think absolutely, yes. And actually, we're going to be having workshops for people who purchase the book called The Abuser's Playbook, because honestly, I did this, I talked about this yesterday, but it's like we never used to talk about cancer before because it was always horrifying to think we knew someone who had cancer, right? So we'd say the C word, or we wouldn't really talk about it. And that's what's happened with domestic abuse. People don't understand that coercive control is the underpinning of it all. It is not about someone being codependent or having low self-worth. It could be, but that's not the primary factor. It's about one person choosing to control another person. And so if we don't start armoring up beforehand, before we go out into the world and start creating relationships, we are certainly going to be behind the eight ball sometimes, because there are, unfortunately, a lot of people who want to exert power and control over others.
Yeah.
Just a matter of fact. It's just a fact of life that people are, suffer from horrible illnesses. It's a fact of life that many, many, in particular women, but of course other people, suffer from abuse in their relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. And Amy, you work with people across the kind of full process, people just contemplating all the way through, wow, I'm 8 years out and here I am back in court, got a new motion. So my guess is this really fits for not just one specific woman you're working with, right? Like not one specific clientele, but just, yeah, that range of people and women in that, in all of these situations.
Precisely. I think there are lessons in every one of these 22 stories we have here from women around the world, US, Canada, the UK, and Australia. And, I think one of the most heartbreaking parts of the job we have to do, I was just on with a coaching client this morning who said, I have all this proof of domestic abuse and I'm going to go to my police department and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And I'm going to, and her attorney doesn't want her to. And so I often have to be the one who has to explain to her, this is the reality we're living in, right? Like I care about you. I want to protect you, but I've also got to be real with you. This is the family court system we have. This is how this could be turned against you. Because I think we were all, those of us who've been through this, we're all that woman one day where we went in thinking, well, it's going to be fair. I'm going to tell my story. I mean, here's all the evidence. Somebody's going to look and it's just so obvious, right? And it is mind blowing, right? Family court's been called an upside down world. It's been called the Twilight Zone. You name it. It's where black is white. It's really, I think that's one of the hardest things for people to wrap their heads around. And so, yes, that's what I'm doing for every step of the process.
Yeah. And so let's do it. Let's talk about what is the state right now. And it's not just the United States. That's where we're recording. I believe that's where we all are living, but it is not just the US, it is all over. But what have you all seen kind of as the trends and the state of our larger systems regarding coercive control, regarding abusive relationships? Because people do need to understand and know.
I mean, I think that highlighting the importance of our legislation we have in the United States, which is codifying coercive control as a form of domestic abuse, that's something that I testify for, and we will go through the entire process and then the law will get put aside, right? So this is what keeps on happening. And it's interesting because if we could only appeal, I think, to the people who think this doesn't impact them, and that's what this book is about, right? Like, who thinks that they're not impacted by any kind of domestic abuse? You're sleeping under a rock, seriously. I mean, this is something that we all know someone. And then we go to legislators and we try to push forward this legislation. And gratefully, we have it now in 7 states. But the reality is a lot of good a law does if we don't actually implement it.
Yeah.
So we tell victims, come forward, talk about what's happened to you, share that you've been a victim, share that your children, certainly protect your children. That's the first thing you should do. And then the moment a victim does that, I mean, it's just so ludicrous. The moment a victim does that, it's held against her. As you know, the Joan Myers study that talks about more than half of victims who come forward about domestic abuse are not believed in our court system. And so, I was on a client this morning myself, and we were talking about how she really wants to leave, but now she's petrified. And someone had listened to one of my podcasts, another podcast I'd done, and one of my colleagues said, I really don't want to share it with her because I'm afraid she won't leave. I'm afraid she won't escape. And can you imagine that's the world that we're living in? So the state of the world is upside down. The family court underworld is really what's going on. And one of the things that Amy and I, we of course knew beforehand, but it really became very clear is that in all of these countries, there is judicial immunity. And judges are just not held to account. They can do whatever they want. As a matter of fact, one of the pieces of legislation policies that talks about judges' immunity says that even if they have malicious intent, they cannot be held accountable. So that is the world we're living in, which is really, kind of the wild, wild west.
Yeah.
Can I add on to that?
Yes.
Sybil?
Yes.
I think that to Dr. C's point, we put the abuser's playbook here for a reason. So when you ask the state of courts, it's an abuser's playground, and attorneys will tell you that. So for your listeners, what are the kinds of things that happen? There are ex parte emergency orders filed where, an abuser may say, I need the children because the other parent is unsafe. And those temporary orders then become permanent and very hard to overturn. We see over and over again, and this is something I've written about for Ms. Magazine, women depicted as crazy and hysterical and wronged and, out for revenge. And once those narratives are posited in a case, it's hard for a woman to combat that. And so you really need to know, ahead of time. And then of course there's parental alienation syndrome, which I'm sure we will talk about, that Dr. Richard Gardner made famous. And, women are blamed for turning the children against the father. And we see that all the time in family court.
And that actually came up today. I don't remember who I was talking to. Oh, one of my I don't know who I was talking to. I was talking to someone today, and we were talking about the new rebranding that consistently happens. And so I was reading some articles, and right now I'm seeing the rebrand of attachment theory, which I'm a play therapist. I work with children. I work with adults too, but I work with children, and I base a lot of my work on attachment theory. So I'm like, oh, look at this article. They're talking about attachment theory. And I started reading, and then it was like, whoops, switch. Actually, this is parental alienation, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, so even, right, someone, if I was just maybe skimming, and I'm a therapist that's well-trained in attachment theory, and I'm just kind of skimming, and I don't know anything about this coercive control in our family court system, I could really easily be pulled into that.
Sybil, you're speaking my language. I mean, you're speaking my language, right? I mean, this is like the idea that therapists, I mean, we talk about this in the book, that there's custody evaluators, forensic evaluators, you name it, the GALs, who are oftentimes gaslighting the clients or truly just engage in complicitness, which is really shocking, but we have to believe that that's happening. There's some collusion going on. But I am trying really hard to train therapists on what coercive control is, because even the term coercive control is now it's being flipped. And we have a mom actually here in Connecticut where the legislation was used against her, and there is no doubt that she was the victim, but the moneyed party, the person with the most money, was able to pursue in a different way. And so it's really frightening. And I think in the clinical world, it's super frightening that therapists are not entirely educated. You see me come out about that on social media. I'm very vocal because it's really problematic and it's an ethical dilemma. And I think about attorneys who take on cases all of the time, and they will take on the case of the victim, and they will also have another case with the perpetrator. Like,
I see that so often.
Right? They don't really care what the reality is. They just care about getting, unfortunately, payment. And yeah, that's a pretty scary world. That's like, it feels to me like coercive control, like coming from the system, right?
Yeah. And I'm wondering, Amy, do you see with your clients that a huge chunk of the trauma is not actually from the abusive relationship with their ex-partner? A huge chunk of the trauma is coming from the system's response.
Well, yes, absolutely. We see it is a secondary trauma, right? It is institutional betrayal. And we are all raised to think, no matter what country you're in, that these institutions are going to protect you, right? We have that naivete, we have that trust, we're paying our taxes, that's what it goes for, right? And if you're living in this blissful married life, right, you may not encounter this system until you end up in a divorce. But absolutely, I think there is this cognitive dissonance when you're in that relationship with the narcissistic abuser, coercive controller. You're trying to grapple with, okay, the person I thought was the love of my life, the person on this planet who had my back, is actually trying to destroy me, right? And it takes a long time to get to that point. It's the same thing with the institution. I think I found this myself. Like, I had an attorney act in a weird way. And I thought, oh no, like I must be imagining this, right? And then something else happened, then something else happened. And then it became so egregious that it blows your mind that it's happening on such a level. And as Dr. C said, there's so much collusion. It can't happen alone, can't happen a silo. There are a lot of players in this. And as I always say, there are a lot of people making a lot of money in this system right now. So what's their incentive to change? We hope that our plays a small role or hopefully a big role in shining a huge light on this, because I really believe it's accountability and shame and embarrassment that may motivate them more than anything.
Yeah, we found here, so in Colorado, we have enacted cadence law. We just had another law, House Bill 1350, that passed that made sure that coercive control was actually well-defined because it hadn't been. And there are a couple other things specific around court evaluators, because we in Colorado have had so much negative press, which was amazing. Thank you to everyone looking out for Colorado. And that was the only thing that did, in my opinion, because I've testified at all these hearings, that is what primed our senators and representatives to actually pay attention, because Colorado looked so horrible.
Precisely.
And so we need to, like, flashing lights, sirens, red lights, alarms everywhere, because like I was talking to Lundy a bit ago, and he was like, no one that hears about this and really hears about it would be like, yeah, it's not that's fine. Like, people are like, what is going on? And they're infuriated and they can't believe it some of the time. So that's why I think your book, which I want to shift to talking about your book, is so helpful, because it's not just Sybil, the expert, who's like passionate and a big loudmouth talking about this. These are real people, real women who have experienced it.
Absolutely.
So I'm excited to hear kind of your process and any of the kind of the takeaways of working with these women, sharing their stories with you.
Well, and I just want to highlight, you see the bright red there? You see the bright red? Amy's like, we need bright red. It needs to be as bold as possible.
Yes.
So that we can shine the light. It'll glow in the dark. If you put this on your nightstand, it will literally glow in the dark. So, yeah. But I mean, the reality is women are framed all the time. They are framed in the courtroom. And what's really, again, every single story in here, these are women, but they're mothers. And so what we're really talking about is, how do we prevent intergenerational trauma? This is, I mean, some people call this trafficking of children, because children are being trafficked between a protective parent into an abuser's hands. And at what cost? I mean, the amount of money that we could save if we were preventing children into forced repair therapy, into, all kinds of circumstances with their abuser, not having supervised visitation with someone who maybe a year ago threw the mother down the stairs. I mean, come on, and that's, I think, for me, it always feels like the missing component here is that nobody's really unpacking the pathology of abusers. And I get told very often that I'm a black and white thinker about this issue. And frankly, I am. And these people are maliciously intent on fracturing the attachment between those children and their protective parent. And that is the weapon they will use. Dr. Stark talked about it. They are secondary victims. They're not primary victims. They're secondary because the primary one is the adult victim. And until court professionals realize this, but then going back to what Amy said, many of them do. They just don't care.
And yeah, that's always like when I'm in my jaded space, right? I'm like, they don't even care. And some of them really don't. They don't. They're just going about their day. They're going to make their money. This is a good way, easy way to make their money. Moving on. Like,
well, Sybil, if you're wondering where this book was born, it was born in phone calls between the two of us after getting off with our clients, after hearing these stories, saying, oh my God, this is crazy. Like, people have to know this, right? And that's exactly why we did it.
Yeah.
And so the idea,
go ahead.
I just wanted to just mention that one thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is that family court judges don't choose to become family court judges, and that most attorneys never take a domestic abuse. They don't have to take a domestic abuse course. And part of the problem is, and I love that we have Baba with Cadence Law, but I'm concerned, I just have a little bit of a concern, is that training going to actually be beyond the violent incident model? Or is it all this domestic violence training? And I know that Cadence Law is set up to ensure that we're talking about coercive control. I just know that historically we've always looked through the violent incident model, and that's problematic.
Yeah, and I am fully on board, right? We need the legislation, and that's like step one is legislation. But then what we've seen over time is that people stop after that. They're like, oh, it's a law, good times. But yeah, so my concern, and granted, I know you evaluators are probably in the same spot. They were like, Sybil, you need to do the training for the evaluators for. And I'm like, yes, I do. I absolutely do. And I'm like, when in my in my days and weeks am I going to be doing this? And so there is a concern from all of us, that we're kind of working with the legislators to have Cadence Law passed, of like, who is actually providing the training? And I'm that annoying, like, wheel, the squeak. I wear that as a badge of honor. People call me a squeaky wheel all the time. Yes, I am. Hey, who's doing the training? Who is providing the training? Is this just, like, that is as important as what is in the training? Right? So I agree that the legislation is step one. We need to keep going.
Well, we have a whole section in the book called The Call to Action, because we hope that people become enraged when they read Framed. We're not going to lie to you. It's not going to be an easy beach read, but it is a must read, right? And so we hope that when they get to the end, it's like, what are they going to do with that pent up anger and passion to change things? And so we tell them about the legislative updates, how they can become involved on a local level, what they can do, even just for the people in their lives they encounter going through this. So I think we really believe that there has to be a grassroots kind of movement, much like Mothers Against Drunk Driving in the US or something like that. That's what we're dreaming for, right, Dr. C?
Absolutely. And the book has a trigger warning section, and we have notes at the end of every story where we discuss what maybe could have happened differently or how it could have happened differently. And we have a lot of references for researchers throughout the world who have been working on this topic for a long time. So
yeah, I find it really hard, and it kind of depends on who my audience is of what I'm doing, right? But how do you share, this is the reality of what you're going through, and hold hope for people at the same time? I think that is always a balance that I am looking at holding. Like, I don't need to rub salt in the wounds of those deep in it, but you need to know all this. Like, I don't want to scare you, like you were saying about that client that was like, I'm not leaving. Nope. This is so scary. Like what I am hearing and learning, I don't want to leave. And I think that that's really common. So if you're listening, because I do know I have a lot of engagement with my audience. You all reach out to me all the time. I know there's a lot of you that have not left yet. And we know that it is scary. And the education, so psychoeducation and learning about the system and learning what people are going through and learning from their experiences is going to be really helpful, no matter your choice, right? It's not my choice. Like, we want to give back your autonomy because that's what was taken from you. So it's your choice. And reading stories of other women where you can see yourself. It's not going to be the same story, but that is my experience in all of the women I work with and in the Rising Beyond community. None of the stories are the same. And yet they they can understand and relate so well and can offer that support without judgment. And so you will probably, if you're listening, will hear yourself in these stories.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The idea is to ensure that people know that even if there's always a common thread, there's always something in one story that is going to be like, wait, that happened to me. And what we hope is that someone might say, oh, wait a minute, maybe this is abuse. Like, what about that? What about the people who remain in relationships for a very long period of time and they never knew they were living in abusive relationships. That's me educating on this topic my entire life. So that's how insidious it is. And, we need to give ourselves grace and understand that this can happen where we totally miss the signs. So maybe this book for some people is just going to be, knowing that you're living in an abusive relationship is very empowering, even if you can't escape, even if you can't. It's very empowering to just know, okay, wait a minute, I know what he's doing now. I know what's happening here. I know how I can protect my children without it seeming defensive. There's a lot of strategies that can be done while you remain there. Not that we want people to remain there, but there is no judgment for staying.
Yeah. Yep. And your situation. I am an expert on a lot of things. I am not an expert on your life. And so we want you to learn to trust you.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Would you like us to read? Yeah, go ahead, Amy. Go ahead.
I was going to ask, can we get a little sneak peek? So everyone, believe even at the time this releases, it is right before it fully releases. So when this episode goes live, it is pre-order time, everyone. So we are getting a little sneak peek that you all don't have the opportunity to read yet because it's pre-order. So we would love to hear whatever little tidbits you want to share.
Amy, you can go if you want. Sure.
Okay. So I am reading from Aurora's story. She's from Australia, and it's called The Judge's New Clothes. And I will just tell you a little background. Her daughter disclosed during the divorce process that she said she was abused by her father. This is a little of what transpired after. The judge, lawyers, family court reporter, and independent children's lawyer relied on a false and malicious notification made by my sister, a child safety worker at the time, laid deliberately to help the father gain sole custody. No one in the court knew my sister had been arrested, but not prosecuted, and was sacked from her job for filing this false report. I only found out about it after the trial. She had given the notification to the father. His affidavits and fabrications mirror the notification. Although I proved that the father lied and the judgment had many errors during appeal, it was dismissed. The orders still stand. Again, I was failed by legal aid lawyers. The no contact domestic violence order I put in place to protect myself and on which the child is named is still active and is actually quite extensive. However, the judges of the Australian family law system are allowed to overrule these protective orders via their, quote, discretion. They are not supposed to, and the law is changing to stop this. The only way out for mothers and children in our situation in Australia is to file a Rice and Asplund. This involves the mother going back to the court and telling them that she lied, she was crazy, delusional, and being vindictive, so the father is innocent and did absolutely nothing wrong. The Rice v. Asplund case dealt with the living arrangements for a 3-year-old child and established that in order to get a modification, a parent had to prove there had been a significant change in circumstances since the final custody orders. The mother must go back to the family court and say that she lied about the sexual violence and everything else, that she has now, quote, changed her ways. She must have psychiatric reports to prove this, and she must be on medication. She must unequivocally state that she lied and she was of mistaken belief. If she says this, she may get some unsupervised visitation of her children, but never proper custody ever again. I have found out that in the last 10 years in Australia, every mother I've learned about that has been deemed a protective parent by child safety and then gone to a family court to have their child protected to gain sole custody has lost all parental rights and physical custody. So, that goes to what I was saying a few minutes ago about the woman's crazy, right? The courts are stacked against women in many cases and in favor of the perpetrator. So, they will even go to that extent where she has to recant what she said and admit that she's insane.
Yeah, I was just thinking in the Rising Beyond community and in my practice, I talk a lot about moral injury, and it's not a super well researched in the civilian population, but it's a really well researched topic within the veteran and military population. And I am just thinking like, oh my gosh, moral injury. it's like an injury to your soul. It's like the best, like description, and having to recant something that you know to be fully true just to see your child. Like having to reconcile that is, right, such harm caused.
Yeah, I think Judith Herman's book, right, Truth and Repair, talks all about that, where it's just how do you repair when the truth is never really heard, when there's never accountability. It's really hard to do that. The trauma is just ongoing. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah. Horrifying. And I wish that I could be like, that's like one person, Amy. That's not, no, it is consistent. So do we get to hear any more of the story of the book?
I could share Anna's story, Munchausen by proxy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've had this experience, Sybil, but a lot of moms are now being accused of child medical neglect. And I think it's important, like with Amy's story, to just highlight, again, we're not saying this only happens to women, but the system is set up. It's structurally endemic. Patriarchal norms are the foundation. It's just the way it is. There's lots of research out there that shows that judges believe in a hierarchy of power, and they believe mothers lie all the time. And so it's the way the system is, and it's not a diss against men. It's actually saying, inviting men, come on, help us get through this, because you can be part of this grassroots movement too. So before our separation, Sophie became very sick, and we sought help from 2 physicians at Stanford Hospital. Sophie was diagnosed with a chronic inflammatory disease, and after several months of treatment, she made full recovery. Scott supported Sophie's diagnosis and treatment, often commenting on her progress. Despite warnings by the doctors the condition might return, I felt secure knowing Sophie was in the care of esteemed professionals. She remained under the care of these Stanford doctors through the finalization of our divorce. And then, just like that, Sophie's medical team was dismantled. A week after the divorce, a new narrative emerged, that I was unstable and I was faking my daughter's illness. Scott disputed Sophie's diagnosis and blocked our access to her team. Hi, Maggie. I assumed that with documented evidence by 2 specialists at Stanford that nothing would change. I had no idea the length Scott was willing to go. Scott sent multiple emails accusing me of Munchausen by proxy, now known as medical child abuse or fictitious disorder, imposed on another. It is when a caregiver makes up or causes health problems in someone under their care. I was shocked. I couldn't believe that Scott would make such an accusation. I was also confused. He had been supporting Sophie's healing process all along until we divorced. What changed? We had the nation's leading experts engaged in Sophie's treatment, and the treatment worked. Scott went so far as to claim the doctors had medicated Sophie with toxic treatments. Reeling from this, I couldn't imagine any of Scott's allegations would ever hold water. Yet within a few months, a family court-appointed professional, a parenting coordinator, ruled in his favor. For all intents and purposes, I was deemed unstable. Sophie was no longer able to see her team of doctors nor receive the treatment that alleviated her symptoms. Scott now claims that he does not recall our daughter ever being diagnosed and treated by 2 Stanford physicians. Worse, when I make suggestions or ask for more information from doctors or anyone on Sophie's new team, Scott describes feelings of being unsafe with me, claiming I am trying to sabotage Sophie's treatment for her replacement diagnosis of acute anxiety disorder. He tells team members who are on his team that I am creating an air of hostility. This is a Darvo tactic, where coercive controller narcissistic abusers deny wrongdoing, attack the actual victim, and reverse victim and offender. He is accusing me of exactly what he is doing. And the only thing that changed was a divorce.
Yeah. Yeah, we see that, right? I work with children, and a lot of them are in these cases. And that is when I'm doing the intakes, I do it with both parents, which is anxiety provoking. I know, for all of my protective parents, and I need the data, right? I need to see it. But this is scary if you have a therapist that doesn't know this, right? So I get why it feels really scary. And so many times the abusive parent is telling me about Munchausen by proxy, right? Or the mom is saying this, or even the dad. I have a couple of, again, gender kind of switch in that. Right. And for me, I just, right. I'm like, oh, okay, I see you. Right. But it can be so scary because people are like, oh gosh, this is horrible. This must be happening. And they believe it. But it's really actually common in our practice that we see that that's the allegation.
And I'm so grateful that they're coming to you and that you know and see what's going on. Like we need people like you who are like, sure, come and see me for therapy. let me work with your child. I got your number, right? We need that. And that's part of the problem is I don't think we have enough people doing this, or our clients certainly aren't able to access or find these people, which is so important. The interesting part about this story is that those Stanford doctors refused. So this is the other, right? So we think about the medical system also complicit and not looking out for the best interests of the children. And so
Yeah.
how many times does child welfare, medical system, all of these systems just fail to just stand up for what's ethically right? Like, it's just like, where is the integrity? Hello, everyone. Yeah, it just seems to be totally gone.
Yeah. And what fascinates me about this is, right, like there's not, like, do I enjoy a lot of these cases? No, not all the time, right? They're exhausting. They can be scary because guess who's going to grieve me? Guess who's going to threaten to sue me? Right?
We could have discussions about that.
So so if you're wondering, like, why don't people do this? I say I'm in and I always use the air quotes, high conflict divorce, and they send me away. It's because they're scared of your partner, your ex-partner. And so then from my perspective, I'm like, okay, doctors and therapists and everyone, you're scared of their ex-partner. Doesn't that tell you something about this protective parent having to do this? They don't get the choice to say, no, thank you. No, thank you. I'm not going to work with you.
Sadly, Sybil, you're touching on something we see all the time, not just with therapists, but I have a client in Boston. They have a parent coordinator, yet another expert they have to pay, and she just wants a divorce. She's actually one of the stories in our book. And her husband threatened the parent coordinator and the receptionist, and they got so scared they decided with him on all these vacation requests. Like, he was totally in the wrong, but they wanted to protect themselves. So that's what we see too. These abusers are bullying everybody, right? And who's losing? The protective parent, because other people are just giving in to protect themselves. And well, the protective parents and the children obviously are hurt by these decisions.
Yeah. Yes. And I have an attorney on retainer for my practice because we work with these cases. So, but it's real, is like my malpractice insurance is higher than a lot of other people's because of who I work with, because if it's in my child's best interest that I'm working with, I testify only if it's in their best interest. Otherwise, my attorney's going to quash that right there. But yeah, so there's like the major impacts that people don't see or realize, like why our system is the way our system is and why there's not the support. It's so layered, like just layer and layer and layer. And so it makes it hard. So yes, we need the grassroots effort of people who are willing just to be a voice. You don't have to be a therapist working with these kids, getting threats to your emails all the time. You don't have to do that, but we need more voices. We need more.
Absolutely. And we're so honored. I don't know if you know, but Dr. Ramani wrote our foreword, and we're super excited about that. And Lisa Fontes also says, as an expert witness, I can attest that Cocchiola and Polacko's groundbreaking book sheds light where it is severely needed or sorely needed. So we are just really grateful for the people who have been supporting the book, including yourself. I mean, all the work that you do, being one of those badass therapists. I don't know if I could say that online, but we appreciate it.
Everyone knows here I have a potty mouth. I'm trying to be really good. I'm trying to be so good right now.
You should have told us that at the beginning.
On the podcast, I try to be more tame than in other places. Well, I am excited for it. I really am. I don't promote things that I don't support. Like, that is just not what I do. And so if you trust me, because you're listening to me and you listen to me every week, I am telling you that I think this book is going to be amazing. And so where can they pre-order it? Where can people get more information?
Well, we'll put in the link in maybe your show notes, all the places where they can order, but we definitely recommend people can go to narcfreepress.com and there'll be a link there to pre-order. And as Dr. C said earlier, anyone who pre-orders the book will get a free ticket to our workshop on the abuser's playbook. And we think it's important that everyone knows their game, how to recognize it, no matter what situation you are in right now. And we encourage you to join our framed book launch team. It's on Facebook. You can easily find it. And we have an army of people in there who are going to help spread the word. Every little bit helps. So wherever you live, where you have connections with an organization, we encourage people to not just buy a copy for themselves, but for the women they care about. And, as Dr. C always says, the men too, right? We want the dads of young women and, who see this all the time. I have a son of a mom. He's an adult son of a mom who's going through this. And he's constantly messaging me on Instagram because he was just as shocked. Like, he did not realize this happened. And he's watching his mother go through this in her 70s, so there are men out there who care, and we're asking them to join our fight.
Yeah, and I'm going to put out there that I agree that we need the mental health profession to have a greater understanding of what is going on in just the larger systems that we're in. If you're a child therapist, you're going to see this. If you're a therapist literally working with anybody, coercive control, domestic abuse, you will come into contact with that, whether they're coming to see you for that or not. And so this is a really great way it's not just like that clinical book, right? Like, I'm kind of overreading a bunch of clinical texts right now. So this is a book that will help you understand the experiences of the women in it.
Absolutely. And Sybil, if I might say, it's kind of like a case study book, but also if anybody's looking for coercive control training, I do that. I'm doing it through PESI right now, and I also do it separately. And I just, obviously to your protective parents, I'm always trying to teach protective parents how best to help navigate this, even when they're living with the abuser or they're sharing custodial time, because this is a tough nut in life. I was just talking to somebody else today, and we were just like, this is not what we expected for our life trajectory. Anybody who's experienced this, it's just not. And it's really hard.
Yeah, it's the club you don't actually want to be in.
That's right. That's right.
Club you don't want to be in, but you're here, you're in it. There are those of us that want to do everything to support you. So y'all, thank you so much for being with me. Thank you all to everyone who listens, who joins me every week. Because y'all do reach out to me, I will make sure I get any of your comments, any of your thoughts back to Dr. Cocchiola and Amy so that they can hear your thoughts as well. I so appreciate you all listening. I so appreciate you all being here. And we will catch you on the next episode of the Rising Beyond podcast.
Thanks so much, Sybil.